The Midnight Gospel. What in the hell just happened? I just watched this series and I'm feeling a very weird mixture of confused, hopeful, sad, and thankful, which is odd considering how little I was looking forward to watching it. I saw the trailer about a week ago and it did not convince me it was going to be good. But the animation looked kinda cool, it was by the guy that did Adventure Time, and my friends kept asking me what I thought about it, so I felt I had an obligation to check it out. For them and for you guys, my YouTube homies.
Homies help homies. Always.
Anyway, after sitting through every episode, some more than once, honestly, I still don't know what to think about it. Like, it's obviously a brilliant show, and I appreciated it, but I can't tell if I liked it or didn't like it or what. Before we get into what I know my thoughts are, let's discuss what the Midnight Gospel's about. Its origin story starts with real-world comedian Duncan Trussell, and yes, that is his real ridiculous name. Duncan Trussell has a podcast called the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, where him and his guests, be they writers, academics, or meditation teachers, talk about philosophy, spirituality, and cerebral subjects in an eclectic and complex way. Trussell teamed up with Pendleton Ward, the creator of Adventure Time, to animate over these recordings.
If you're an evil witch, I will punch you for fun.
The resulting work is Midnight Gospel, which, in addition to being a quote-unquote video podcast, follows a guy named Clancy, played by Trussell, as he uses different avatars to travel through simulated dimensions interviewing absurd creatures for his spacecast.
Goes into space.
In every episode, the spacecasts are bookended by serialized segments that tie the show together. I've heard a lot of people describe the Midnight Gospel as Adventure Time meets the Joe Rogan Experience, but I think the more succinct way to put that is Yellow Submarine on crack.
Pepperland goes blue.
Like the 1968 Beatles movie, it's surrealist and unnervingly weird. However, unlike the Beatles movie, it shows way more human innards. Besides the obvious features that make you feel like you're in a fever dream or painting or warm hug depending on the episode, the format of the show is incredibly unique and adds to the insane tone. And I'm not talking about how they animate over the podcast, I'm talking about what they animate. Superficially, it's the farthest away from the see-say concept I've ever seen, meaning what they're saying in the podcast is not what's represented on screen.
But also, meditation has been incredibly useful because now I can sit and I can meditate, and then maybe the dogs will bark, right, while I'm meditating.
Instead, Trussell and Ward decided to pair these organic pre-recorded conversations with seemingly unrelated visually driven stories, making it difficult to follow either element. I often found my mind wandering between the animation and the conversation, ultimately leading to me missing most of what was happening in either part. And like I said, they aren't just any old conversations. Much like the graphics, they're extremely high concept and intricate, delving into difficult topics like death, happiness, and the self. I did enjoy how each discussion seemed to start in the middle, like Clancy had already known the people he was interviewing, even though he just met them along with us.
You mind if I interview you for my video Spacecast?
Okay.
You can talk!
You know, I love being around people that help me see the world through a new pair of glasses, and you're one of those people.
Thank you.
It was authentic, like we weren't wasting time to get to the heart. Like these characters we've just been introduced to are skipping the chit-chat and being open about what they're feeling. Because it's so heady, this is not a show you can binge watch or even view once.
What is it that has the quality of benevolence? And the only word that I can come up with is reality. Reality actually has this quality of benevolence.
It's something where you should watch and listen to one episode at a time, sit and think about what you've experienced, for lack of a better word, then watch the same episode again to collect anything you probably missed the first time around. Then you can sit and think some more before moving on to the next episode. Through playing with that strategy for a couple of segments, I found something really interesting about the seemingly unrelated animation over the podcast. While each one of these stories does its own thing and doesn't connect directly to the topic, they do thematically call back to it. There are a lot of small details that reflect some of the more subtle facets of what's being said.
What are you? Are you a metaphor?
For example, they animated Clancy and a small spectacled president casually traveling across a zombie apocalypse wasteland over an interview with Dr. Drew Pinsky, a public figure and addiction specialist. They were talking about drugs and their merits. Pinsky's main thesis was,
"There's no such thing as a bad drug. It's the circumstances."
In conjunction with that, in the background, we observe the story of other survivors creating a drug to cure zombies. Through the podcast, we see the positive and negative repercussions of the drug depending on the context in which it's administered. Outside of the apparent audio-visual clash, another thing that made me slightly uncomfortable was the certainty most of the guests had when discussing spirituality on any level. Whether it was about Buddhism or Christianity or just the idea of a soul and a self. I get that's kind of the whole point of the show. But as an atheist and someone who's firmly rooted in science and evidence, it was slightly off-putting not to hear contradictory points of view when almost everyone was confidently espousing higher powers or the realness of magic.
You know, I don't have very many friends just because magic is my life.
For sure.
I do this for hours and hours and hours a day.
And by magic, I don't mean Harry Potter or stage. I mean magic with a K. As Trussell puts it, it's the idea of
connecting with a divine intelligence. You're hoping from your connection with the divine intelligence to produce some change in your own psychology, in your own life, and maybe create good fortune or whatever it is you're praying for, healing, whatever it may be. That's magic.
However, I slowly realized that despite many of the topics centering around more ethereal ideas, they're all grounded in universal wants, like to be happy or to find peace. And a lot of the concepts, principles, and practices mentioned to improve yourself can be applicable to anybody, regardless of what you believe.
The moment I just accepted where I was, instead of wishing I was somewhere else, everything just got better.
Some of those principles and practices included being in the moment, listening, and silence, which were also overarching themes through many of the episodes. I thought about some of those themes, and as I did, I started to understand the show's disjointed format. It's established in those serialized headers and tags I talked about that Clancy uses interdimensional travel and making podcasts, his art, to distract himself from his less than great life.
But Clancy, no matter where you go, things are always gonna be the same if you don't change.
Clancy may hear his guests talking about how to better himself and find happiness, but he isn't listening. Much like how the audience is distracted from what's being said in the podcast with the fantastical art-driven stories. We're hearing, but there's so much going on that it's hard to internalize anything. Neither us nor Clancy is mentally present. I think that's the idea Trussell and Ward were going for. Whether the purpose was to mimic the constant state of chaos and distraction many of us are mentally going through, or to help the audience practice mindfulness and listening. Much like meditation. A tumultuous meditation. Through the course of the season, Clancy is forced and encouraged to apply the principles he's learned. And as that happens, the animated narratives get a lot less complex. They mellow out and become more serene. A possible reflection of how Clancy has become more aware of his thoughts and feelings in the moment. Without the heavy story, you still need to work to focus on what's being said, but it's a lot easier to grasp during an initial listen. Another interesting detail is that since the show is mainly recordings of Trussell's podcast, every so often guests will refer to Clancy as Duncan.
Duncan? Who's Duncan?
Clancy immediately corrects them with some 80-yard dialogue.
You see, Duncan.
Clancy.
But in the last episode, during a podcast between Trussell and his late mother, she calls him Duncan and he doesn't correct her.
I love you too. And Duncan, that kind of love isn't going anywhere.
He accepts it and continues to listen. In that moment, it feels like Clancy isn't actually a character developed for the show, but rather an avatar that's allowed the creator Duncan Trussell to escape whatever issues he's having in his real world by using the podcast and the show as a distraction.
You mind if I interview you for my, am I dead?
Just be here now.
Now, I have no proof for any of this, but it makes sense inside my mind, so that's what I'm gonna go with. But yeah, the Midnight Gospel. All of the interviews were eye-opening and interesting. I especially liked the last episode with his mother. I didn't expect to get teary-eyed there, but it happened, so that's a whole thing. But I still don't know what to think about the show as a whole. I mean, I wasn't a fan of Clancy as a character, and as I've said before on this channel, I do not like surrealism. On top of that, I don't like surrealist movies. That's just a thing that I've had to deal with in my life. But I'm glad I saw the show. I would watch it again, but as more of a thought exercise as opposed to anything else. If anything, the show was a great ad for Trussell's podcast, the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. While the animation was trippy and captivating, I'd much rather listen to the guests straight up talk. I'd at least have a better chance of absorbing what they're saying the first time around. So would I recommend watching the Midnight Gospel? Yeah, for sure. At least a couple of episodes if you're into abstract conversation and theme-driven media. It's nothing if not unique and insightful. The catch? I just can't say for sure if you'll enjoy it.
Fuck it.
And those are my thoughts on this extremely weird Netflix series, The Midnight Gospel. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel, you can subscribe and or donate to my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Also, for those of you who are regulars to my video essays, I know the audio kind of sounded a little bit different, and that's because I'm using a different recording system. So let me know what you guys think about it, and if it sounds different or better or whatever, let me know. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later.
Computer, play music.